All right, good morning, everybody. I'm scared. Good morning, everybody. All right, thank you for the response. All right, so as against what you saw in the program, there was a slight typo in the program. That one says reimagining, but it's actually reimaging children in media and charity representation. So this is about my research, PhD research that I'm doing at Sussex. Part of the photographs that you'll be seeing are on display over there as well. I've been working with children who were displaced by Boko Haram terrorist group in Nigeria. I'm working with them for some time now, so as we go on, we'll talk more about what that collaboration has been like. Now, I'd like to start with a question. I'd like to know, when people talk about Africa, when people say Africa, when people say I'm going to Africa, or I just came back from Africa, or is from Africa, what comes to your mind? What feeling does it evoke in your mind when you hear the word Africa? I'd like to have your honest responses. Huh? Poor. Hot. Okay. Okay, so they're talking about the weather, that it's very hot. Okay, what else? What feeling? I actually want to know about the feeling it evokes in you. What do you think about? Be honest. I want you to be honest. You know, the overriding thoughts that you generally perceive from the media about Africa. Lead. Need. Very good. Very. Thank you very much. Need. You know, poverty. Come again. Light out. Okay. That's electricity. You know. No. It's okay.
Possible new future.
New future. Yes, that's an imagine.
Possible new future.
Possibly. All right. So what else? Farming. Very good. Yeah. You mean agriculture or farming as in F-A-M-I-N-G? I-N-E. Yeah. Okay. Good. So generally in the West, this is what comes to your mind when you hear about Africa. A place of suffering, savagery, poverty, want, need, famine, and basically those are the kinds of vibes that we get from the media through charity organizations that come to Africa to help, you know. And my argument is that truly there is poverty in Africa, but that's not the only story. That's just a single story about what is happening in Africa. There are lots of stories, there are lots of narratives that you can draw from things that happen in Africa. In fact, to start with, Africa is usually portrayed as a single nation. Africa is actually a continent of 54 nations. So let's always bear that in mind. And a lot of times, these charity organizations give us the understanding in the West that once you get to Africa, once you get to the streets, these are the kind of children you always see. You know, that's the kind of environment that will always envelop you. You know, children with bloated tummies, flies over their faces and all that. But they never show you this about Africa. They never show you the beautiful cities. In fact, there was a black lecturer in one of the UK universities who showed pictures, landscapes like this of Africa, and he asked his students, majorly white, where they felt this were. And they were like, oh, it must be somewhere in Europe, you know, things like that. But they never show you this about Africa. So, Africa generally, in the minds of people, based on the visual tropes that you have seen, has been constructed as a place of savagery. It has become a metaphor for poverty and suffering through the visual tropes that are constructed to depict that continent. Now, a cultural anthropologist, Stuart Hall, brands these stereotyped, disempowering images racialized regimes of representation. Racialized power relations exist in humanitarian communication as the colonized are framed as the objects of development. Hall further fingers slavery as being responsible for the infantilization of difference in Western representation of the black race. It recalls that white slave masters exercised their power over their black slaves by symbolically castrating them, depriving them of paternal authority, and treating them as children. And that's why mostly children are the visual tropes, are the objects that are used in most cases in the media to represent Africa, suffering children. It's a racialized form of representing a continent that was once colonized and that is continually colonized through the media. It's a form of media imperialism. So this often stereotyped, decontextualized neo-colonial representations are prompted by the colonial past of the West, constructing black people as poor, weak, passive, inferior, sad, despondent, helpless, and the poster images are typically used by NGOs for fundraising. So we have a kind of commodification of black bodies in the media. Donate your £5 can save this child in Africa. That's the kind of narrative, prevailing narrative that we see. Evidence from colonial archives show that the camera was used as an instrument of symbolic control, and colonized peoples were the initial subjects of visual anthropology. So there was a research conducted in the Netherlands 5 years ago with 29 children who are from 2 impoverished neighborhoods in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam and I think Poole. So they asked these children, now don't forget I said they are from 2 impoverished neighborhoods, so that means they were children of poor people. So they asked these children what they thought about poverty, what they thought poverty looked like. And the researchers were shocked by what they heard from these children from the age of 8 and 12. And children said, well, there's no poverty in the Netherlands. Poor people are children from Africa. Basically because that was what they've been exposed to in the media. So they didn't see themselves as being poor, even though their parents went to food banks to collect food. They shopped from charity shops. They collected support from the government and things like that. But they never saw themselves as being poor because the media, the Western media, never portrayed them as poor, even though their parents were poor. So basically we understand the world through its representations, through what we hear from the media, what we see, what we feel, what we know, what we read. It forms and constructs our representation, our understanding of distant people. Africa has become a spectacle of pity and a signpost of distant suffering. And that's what I use in my work, which is called Utopia. That's what I try to do by flipping the narrative of the single story that has been normalized in the media and in charity representations of black people. So I've discovered that there's a kind of binary representation between black and white children in charity representations. Can you play the video for us?
Children. I've seen just that tough like this for kids living in poverty in the UK. I've heard stories that will make you weep. Mums and dads barely keeping their heads above water, not eating so they can feed their children. So please find it in your heart.
Now, watch the graphics. Actors are used to protect identities.
Get money yesterday either. The cook is broken and they can't afford to get it fixed. So how's one supposed to concentrate at school without a proper meal? Joe's house is freezing. The heating's never on, what with the rising bills. And he's so cold he sits on the sofa with his coat on, bubbling under an old duvet. In the UK today, some people face a real choice between eating or eating, and that's not nice. Now, why do things get better?
I think that's okay, thank you.
It's really bleak for our boys.
Let's go back to the slides.
This country has a big
Now from this,
and it needs
Save the Children
help.
as portrayed white British children positively, by not using the real children. They were talking about real situation, real children who are affected by poverty in Britain, affected by lack of food, and affected by not having heaters, in their homes. But in this case, they tried not to portray them negatively, physically, by using actors. Now let's see the next slide. The same Save the Children On the left is a child in Kenya. So to portray the poverty in Kenya, they placed this child, a black child, with an empty place, looking dull, unhappy. But on the right, we have a representation by the Evening Standard newspaper. At Christmas, they usually have this project, the Felix project, it's a charity. So they say, care for a hungry child. It's a campaign for British children, to eat and all that. So they say, care for a hungry child. But can you see the representation of that child? The child is smiling and just holding an apple. But on the other hand, we have the black child with an empty plate looking sad. Alright, so I now go to my photo series called Utopia. And like I said earlier on, I worked with children in Nigeria who were displaced by Boko Haram. They have been living in this displacement camp for 6 years now. I did part of this project last year. The part you're seeing, I did it last year. So as at that time, they had lived in a camp for 5 years. And so what I try to do is to use the same kind of tropes that have been used by the Western media. And I flipped the narrative. So what else do I need to tell you about it? So just go, I'll allow the slides to go on. Then once we are done, I'll come back again. This child was actually born in the camp. His parents met in the camp and got married, and he was born in the camp. So unlike this other one, who was 6 years old when he was captured. So that means she was a year old when she got to the camp. Oh, sorry. So I captured individuals and their families and then the support groups. Do you want to read through all that or you want me to just summarize? Okay, so this family were displaced from Goza. Goza in the conflict area is actually in the northeast of Nigeria. So they were displaced, and on the night they were displaced, Boko Haram came to their home around 3 a.m. I think. Yeah. 4 p.m., sorry. And the man of the house wasn't around, so the woman had to take all the kids. They trekked for several hours until they were able to get to another camp. They trekked 15 miles until they were able to get to another camp. And then after so many months, they had to find their way to the capital city in Nigeria, in Abuja, where they now settled in the camp. And this is another camp, another family as well. The breadwinner was killed by Boko Haram. So the woman has to fend for two of the girls. The two eldest girls are not her daughters, they are nieces. And I guess they probably are orphans. So this particular family has gone through so much because they have had to travel several miles to their current displacement camp. They had moved from one camp to the other because most of the camps in Nigeria are in the conflict zone. So once in a while, Boko Haram still attacks the place. But in order to get safety, they traveled farther to the capital city, Abuja, which is safer. So in total, for all their journeys, in total, they traveled 978 miles to their current destination over a period of couple of months, maybe 4, 5, 6 months, in order to have safety. So this was the boy I said was born in the camp. So what I try to do is to show the resilience of each of these families and individuals. These are things that the charity organizations will not usually tell you about them. They will just tell you donate, but they don't tell you the individual efforts being done by these people, to survive. They don't tell you about their resilience, about their agency, about their strength, and the community, that supports them, the local community. Now, this is a volunteer doctor. In the camp, they have a clinic built by local NGOs. And the doctor volunteers his services 3 times, almost every day of the week, I think. And he also has a pharmacist as well. So, in the camp, they have a school as well, built by youth corpers. Youth corpers are fresh graduates who just left uni. And so the government makes them do a compulsory 1-year service, community service for the nation. So they are posted to other places, and they are posted far from home. So they built those classrooms for the school. And this is a volunteer teacher as well. He was the head teacher of the school. The school was run by a local NGO. This is one of my best images in this series. I was just lucky to be at this place at the time this was happening. And I was just waiting for that moment when a team would win and a team would lose. I wanted to capture their emotions, and this took 20 minutes to achieve, because I was just waiting for that moment, when someone would lose. All right, so you would discover from the way they are represented that, okay, let me just give you a little background about African children. Unlike the way they are represented in the media, where they look dull and drab, children, when they see you with cameras, they just mill around you, asking you to take their picture. They're always jumping, and they just want to be photographed. And each time you take your camera to photograph them, they're always smiling. Sometimes they give you the peace sign, they pose and they exude some swag and things like that. So when I went to this camp, I just wanted to capture reality, the way I saw it. I just wanted to capture reality, because I knew as an African that when seeing the reality, as it were, in the prevalent representations that were in the media. So most of them, each time I tried to photograph them, they would smile at me. But I know as a documentary photographer, in documentary photography practice, usually the subjects are not made to smile. You are supposed to look drab. It's called deadpan portraiture, where you just look without a smiling face. But I have to ask myself if I would be doing justice to documenting these children properly if I documented them that way, if I made them to look that way, without actually capturing them the way they presented themselves to me. In a study conducted by Crossley, 2012, on 10 British volunteer tourists who visited villages in Kenya, it was discovered that rural Africans, despite their poverty, were contented and happy. The 18 to 24-year-old tourists were surprised to see swords of smiling, waving children in every village they visited, rather than how they were portrayed in charity constructs as sad-looking and desperately in need of Western aid. They branded them poverty with a smiling face. Crossley further argues that their poverty notwithstanding, the Western volunteer tourists agree that the children are happier than those in the West because of the social wealth that flows to them communally through family, love, and friends. Continental and diaspora Africans possess an unquenchable spirit of resilience and shared humanity through its strong communities as espoused in the African philosophy of Ubuntu. Crispin Hughes, a British photographer whom I interviewed, has worked extensively in Africa for British charities. He admits that he's often requested by NGOs to take sad-looking pictures of people before the NGO's supplies arrive, and to take happy-looking post-intervention images with the same people or people in a neighboring village. He argues that aid agencies portray marginalized communities through these two emotional tropes in order to elicit pity and get public donations. He says, people here in the UK, and I quote, people here in the UK end up thinking people across Africa have a limited emotional range because you will never see a picture of somebody looking mildly embarrassed, an iconic smirk, or the full range of human communication. I know this for a fact because I've taken pictures which have a subtlety of emotions and they are never used. End of quote. So, we move to the next component of the work. And the first component is where I take their pictures. And then the other component is where I do participatory photography with them. So I give them cameras in order to tell their own story, their own narratives. Because almost all the time, we have a Western white male photographer being parachuted to Africa to create narratives of black children. So in this case, we now have these black children empowered, to tell their own stories themselves. So there were 10 children, and they were between the age of 10 and 15, and these are the pictures he came up with. These are some of the pictures he came up with. This was taken by Fatima Ali, a 12-year-old girl. It's a picture of her sister who is into dressmaking in the camp. We have people in the camp who are actually having their own businesses. They are not really dependent on any foreign aid as a way of foreign intervention, because in actual fact, there is no international presence in this particular camp. No UNICEF, no Save the Children. Everything is by communal support and effort. Now, I would like you to look at what each child says they want to become, because I interviewed each child. I said, what would you like to become in future? An average Nigerian child would tell you, I want to become a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor. But in this case, the children tell me a different thing. So this one wants to become a photographer. Good. Because she loves seeing beautiful women. So Zara Ali's mom makes these slippers in the camp so that she can so this was a family I told you about that they lost the breadwinner. So this girl who took this picture wants to become a soldier, and she has a reason there. So this is one of the donors who come to camp every time. I spent weeks in the camp, and this happens every weekend. Someone will just drive in, an average Nigerian will just drive in with gifts and donations for them, And people also come there to celebrate their birthdays as well. Instead of celebrating your birthdays with your friends and having a lavish party, you just come to the camp, invite all the children, get a DJ, make them happy, give them loads of food, toiletries, daily needs and all that. So Ali here captures one of those people who come to camp to give them donations. These animals are also donations from people as well. So when those donations come, they have a camp. They have camp officials, a chairman, secretary, spokesman, women leader. So they actually share, and they have 11 communities, 11 groups in the camp. So the leader of each group actually comes out to represent his group, and they share the donations equally and give to each person to go and share with his group. About 2,000 people are in the camp. So this person named her pet cat Starboy. I've had this exhibition all over Europe and America and Nigeria as well. And someone who saw this in Brighton said he never could imagine that children who live in camps would have pets. Because the perception they've always had in the West is that these people are suffering. They cannot even afford to feed themselves, let alone having pets, So that's the camp clinic at the background. So as at this time, when this picture was captured, they didn't have sanitary facilities in camp. But 6 months later, when I went there, some group had built toilets for them. A lot of things had changed in those 6 months between my first visit and second visit. Each shed in camp, each tent is not as the space that occupies where the tents are built is not up to the size of this podium at all. So imagine a family of 7 putting themselves in a space smaller than this. But back home, they had big houses, 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. But here, the whole family has to sleep on this bed. All right. So, contemporary black storytellers should not play to the African helplessness trope by awfully replicating normative stereotypes. There's an imperative for a global network of storytellers to produce and distribute empowering narratives and to create a global space of interconnected conversations around authoring global lives. To break free from this codification of African helplessness and infantilization of difference, black people need to free themselves from the shackles of mental slavery imposed by stereotyped imagery, produce our own cosmologies of understanding. We have to produce our own images, circulate them, and they have to shine differently. We can break that through, and it needs to be eroded over like a couple hundred years. We have to unpack its colonialities. More photography and film schools are needed in Africa. We need more online platforms like the Everyday Africa Collective on Instagram, which uses photography to challenge misconceptions about the continent. Regarding conversations on global poverty, charity organizations should educate the public sufficiently about the complexity of the issues, the complicity of Western organizations and governments, what generates the conditions of poverty. With cameras and creative storytelling skills, the Global South can create means of self-narrativization to contest problematic representations. The Western media and charity organizations should uncommodify black bodies, highlight local efforts in conflict resolution, and to objectively tell stories of the strength, hope, and resilience of the distant other. Thank you very much.
So this is since I would know journalists. I'm just down to find everything that I think. I mean, we were in Malawi last year. We've been going to this, and we go to those places. We have all these NGOs, and we wonder what exactly are they doing there, because we can't really see what the impact that they have. But when you mentioned about those pictures, I can relate with that, because when we were there, those were the kind of pictures, but that's not really how it is on the ground.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I know that's part of your document, but how can there be some form of collaboration? We talked about that already. But how can there be some form of collaboration? Because I would definitely want to, engage into this. Because really, with all those children, giving them cameras, and then they're telling their stories that we don't even hear in the media, there should be more of that, because it will also empower them. Also, for us to feel that, they've got problems. And I mean, I looked at your picture and I saw the cat, and I said, can we actually have a cat in the camp when they said that they don't have anything? So it was a shock for me. But I'm very happy that you were bold enough and brave enough to go in and do this. So how can we
more collaboration? Yeah, in several ways. Now, one of the things I've done, after I finished doing this, I had the first exhibition in Brighton. It was a huge exhibition. And then when I went back to the camp, I had an exhibition in the camp as well. So with the children and their parents seeing the pictures. And then I invited the local media, the national TV, a lot of newspapers, journalists to see. They took their pictures, they interviewed the children, they were on national TV, they were in the newspapers. So it was a great feeling for them. And then I also invited government officials. And the question, and what I mainstreamed to them was, now from what the children have said, most of them want to become soldiers in order to revenge, in order to retaliate the killing of their parents, of their relatives. What are you doing to help them with the trauma? What are you doing to rehabilitate them? So for me, it's an advocacy platform, So several people can come to do different things. You could, if you've got trauma training, it's always easy to get into this camp if you know the right people. They're always willing to receive people, so in form of training for rehabilitation or even empowerment, anything that can economically empower them, And then also in forms of other donations, because they are always in need. There are babies, there are children, who need things from time to time. Now, all these parents were economically stable before the displacement. They had their own houses, they had their businesses, but right now the displacement has made them lose everything. So they had to start all over from scratch. So it makes them look as if they are poor. But it's actually the situation that has made them poor at this time, So one can also support them economically by maybe setting up businesses for them or assist them to have, now some of them now have businesses in the camp. One can also help them with more capital, to expand the businesses. And many of them are thriving. Now look at that young boy, that 15-year-old boy who sells cashew seeds. And he bought himself a bicycle. He's so proud about that bicycle. Each time I go to the camp, he's always telling me, uncle, I mean, we need to finish taking pictures. I need to go and ride my bicycle. He's just so proud about it. So that shows, and a lot of all those children too are doing businesses on their own, selling things. There is this, it's just about the African spirit. There is just this self-sustenance, what's it called? Attitude, to things. So it can be supported in several ways, and those are some of the ways I've mentioned. But there are many other ways as well. We can talk, and I can always connect you with the officials of the camp.
Thank you, Tunde. I'm very happy about this because almost as if they see all of us from Africa as very poor, that we can't do anything out of ourselves. So what can we do now to tell the world that Africa is a well-blessed country, or the continent is well-blessed by God? We have almost all the resources, and not all of us are poor. We experienced this same thing when we were coming. At Dubai, the four of us, they saw us as if we couldn't afford to come to England or outside. So why these 4 Africans? So they have to, my daughter, they have to set her aside with the explanation that the gadget that they used to screen us. At the last point, when we were to board the plane to UK, they have to set her aside that there is an alarm. Surprisingly, they went through everything, they didn't see anything. Nobody hears the alarm, but they just want to find something us because we shouldn't get 4 of us shouldn't come from Ghana to this place. That is
how can you afford that?
They silent us, and the plane everybody has boarded the plane. They will not give us a boarding pass because there is an alarm that nobody hears it. So we waited until after 1 hour, they brought a policewoman to search her, and nothing was found. The sad of this is that they didn't even apologize and give us a reason why that. So if this same gadget is supposed to detect something, is telling lies, can we try this gadget again? Then the gadget can even allow people who are carrying contraband goods to enter the plane. We were so sad. We go to Heathrow, they have to silence us, 4 of us. They scream out twice. So they see Africa as nothing good can come from Africa. It is not so. We were supposed to be 6, my husband and my son, to travel to this place in Singapore. But because of his schedule at the office, they didn't allow me. They gave me only 10 days. So we decided that once he has been here before, then we should just take the 10 days to Singapore. It would have been 6. We are blessed. We don't need anything. You can ask one God. We've been coming here several times.
Yeah.
So we have to do something to tell the world that not all of us are poor. After all, when we came here, there are people begging. White people approach us and begging for money. So where is that in Africa? We don't see these things from the Western.
It's a form of the media does a lot to cover up and to expose, based on media agenda, the agenda of editors and things like that. And that's now, I don't know if anybody has read this book by Richard Dowden, Africa, Altered States, and I've forgotten, It talks a lot about this. I mean, he's a British white male who has worked in Africa for like 40 years. So he has been able to understand the continent from both sides. And in that book, it shows us the both sides, the good, the bad, the good and the bad sides of Africa. It tells the truth. I mean, as an African, I agree with him totally on the book, even though some of the things he wrote have changed since 2007 that the book was written. So it's all about media. Yes, so Richard Dowden, who happens to be a journalist, talks about the fact that even as a journalist working for his editor in London, the editor would only tell him would only dispatch him to the continent anytime there's any negative news about Africa. Maybe there's a landslide, there is not tsunami. There is a war, violence, those are new times. But it's never dispatched to go when good news are happening, because good news in Africa is no news. It's no news, and it's so sad. So it's a particular trope that has been presented for generations from the colonial times, and that's why I said in my conclusion that it's only Africans that have that have the huge responsibility of presenting their continent in a balanced fashion. We know there are problems in Africa, just like we have problems in other parts of the world. But unfortunately, the problems in Africa are emphasized, beyond the good things, that are happening to people in Africa. So when you get to, I've experienced it as well in this country. A nurse, I took my children to the clinic for treatment one day, and so the two of them were given injections, and so I promised my kids, don't worry, I'll give you a treat when we get home. I'll give you chocolates. And then you know what the nurse asked? Do you have chocolate in Nigeria? For a moment I was stunned. It was like I didn't hear what she said properly. I had to reprocess it in my mind. Do you have chocolate in Nigeria? I was like, do you think it's a place where people live on trees? A friend once asked, another friend of mine, a white friend once asked a black friend from Zimbabwe or so, that, how did you travel to Britain? Like, did you trek, or did you come by boat, or did you... some people still don't believe that we have airports, that we have those beautiful cities like you saw. So it's all about media mainstreaming, and that is visuals do a lot in constructing our representation, our knowledge, our understanding of other places in the world. Yes, over to you. And back to the screening you talked about, there is a friend of mine, we're in Sussex together. She's doing a PhD research on biometrics, and she discovered that it's always not in favor of people of color. Always not in favor, because it's always, it will just spot some people. Maybe it will not recognize your fingerprints and all that. So biometrics itself is too racialized. There's a racial angle to biometrics, because sometimes it doesn't work for us, because it was actually built by white people.
Thank you very much. I want to commend you for the work that you've done.
Thank you, sir.
I think you are one of the few that is looking at a perspective, a different narrative, and looking at how something can be done about it. It's now time to tell those who complain to shut up. I'm talking about Africans who complain, because I think your conclusion that they should do something about it, including myself, is very poignant. Is the need for the moment. So I'm going to ask you, given that that's the problem, are you looking at enabling or encouraging organizations that actually have the capacity to make those changes, to do something about it? That's the first question. Nigeria is a nation that has over 100 universities, out of which about 20 of them are world class. And many of them do digital photography and art. Is there any forum by which you can encourage or influence bring this to their attention so they can begin to look at doing something about the narrative? Third question. The politicians that are there probably sleepwalking into that misrepresentation. Somebody needs to alert them. They are preoccupied with all the things, problems that need to be dealt with. Do you have any engagement with the politicians who are actually up there, able to make decisions, because you have experienced both ends of the stick? You've lived in the Western world, you've been in the other side of the coin, and you're able to see where the perception has led and could lead. Is there any forum by which you can engage with them, and are you exploring that? I know this is a PhD something, but hopefully it can lead to other things.
Thank you. So I'll take the two together, the one about society and the universities. there is a new thinking now among filmmakers and photographers in Nigeria. I'll speak about Nigeria. Now, all over Africa, it's happening all over Africa. And I think it started in South Africa several years ago. It has spread to Nigeria. It's gone to Mali. It's gone to... So, we visual storytellers are beginning to tell ourselves that the onus is on us now to present the story, because no stranger would ever know the nuances of your culture, of your society as much as you do. So we are beginning to tell ourselves that we need to do that. So that's why there is a lot of... I talked about the Everyday Africa Collective on Instagram. You need to, if you're on Instagram, check their work. So they have, and I belong to that collective as well. They've gotten photographers from all over Africa who are creating images about the positives that are happening in Africa and the everyday life that are happening in Africa. And they post it every day, on Instagram. And they're also on Facebook and Twitter. And so we are creating more narratives and more pictures now and putting them into the cyberspace. Now, those two pictures that I showed you about Nigeria and Egypt, I got them online. Yeah. So putting them more online so that people can see that it's not all about the degrading representation that we have always known about Africa. So about universities, I don't currently have connections with the arts community, in Nigerian universities, but I belong to the photographers fora and all that, and that's one conversation we've been having for years now, and it has continued, and there are lots and loads and loads of people taking up cameras now, going into film now, and creating world-class work. For instance, Genevieve Naji, one of Nigeria's greatest actresses, just created a film now. It's on Netflix, bought by Netflix. It's called Lion Art. It's about a family business, but it's empowering. It's an African narrative. This person too, what's his name? Afolayan. Is creating empowering narratives through film as well. Then we have photographers. We have Andrew Esebo, who has traveled all around Africa and all over the world as well, and has exhibited as well. Talking about the positive narratives, in Africa. We have loads and loads. Tunde Alabi-Hundeyin, a lot of people who are having these conversations, and putting it in a public space. For instance, Tunde Alabi-Hundeyin that I just mentioned worked for Reuters in Nigeria for several years, and when his editor calls from London for him to cover certain stories in a certain way, because the editors would always give you their own slant that they want, and as a photographer, he would insist that, no, I don't think that is proper. Initially they used to have conflict, but with time, his editor began to respect him and began to allow him the opportunity.
Sorry, I know this is such a wonderful and exciting topic, and there's so much discussion to be had, but we are far, far, far beyond the time that has been allocated. So if you'd like to continue the debate and discussion with Tunde after this, please feel free to do so. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to